Hello and welcome. My name is Elle with Elle and Estelle, and today I'm going to be showing you how to sew Simplicity S9186. This is a Mimi G Mrs. coat and jacket. Today I'm going to be showing you how to sew view B, which is the shorter version of the coat. So this pattern calls for brocades, corduroy, cottons, crepe, denim, double knit, ponte, or wool blends. And the sleeves call for a stretch rib knit. You will also need 3 1 1/4 inch buttons. I ended up using a covered button kit, and I used the lining to cover my buttons so that they would match really well. Now for this coat, I used a Mood Dusty Mauve boiled wool fabric. Now as you can see, it's a beautiful mauve color, but I was actually trying to match the color of my pants. Now I saw this fabric everywhere in London. I ended up finding these pants from Marks & Spencer, which of course I had to buy because I love this color so much, but I was disappointed to find that when I came to the US, I couldn't find this color fabric anywhere. So what I did was I started looking online at Mood or any other fabric store that I could find. I was simply typing in mauve, pinks. I was literally searching for anything because I couldn't find this color, and I don't know what this color is called, but I did find this Dusty Mauve, which I am very happy with. It's a beautiful complementary color to the pants. Although it's not exactly the same, it is still a color that I would wear very often. For the sleeve cuff part, it asks for a rib knit fabric. That was harder to find in a Dusty Mauve color. So I took to sourcing this part locally. I went to SR Harris in Brooklyn Park in Minnesota, and I brought around a swatch of this Dusty Mauve with me, and I was looking for a rib knit, or honestly any knit that was similar enough, and I stumbled upon this fabric. As you'll see while I'm cutting it, I end up lining the fabric with the lining from the coat in order to stabilize it, because it is more of an open weave and it has kind of like a glittery, shiny lurex in it. But I thought this was a great complementary color. It has a little bit of pink and white, which kind of mixes the two really well. For the lining, I also sourced locally at SR Harris, and as you can see, all of the fabrics are pretty complementary to each other, although not exactly the same. I ended up doing a covered button in the lining fabric as well, because the boiled wool was so thick, it was really hard to try to get into a covered button mold. So this pattern has a collar and lapel. It has a rib knit cuff, very big poofy sleeves, which are held up with a lining fabric on the inside, which pulls it tight, creating this voluminous sleeve right here. It also has hidden pockets in the side, along the side seams. And on the back, it has this loose decorative belt, which is simply there for the look. It's held on by 2 covered buttons on either side, but it can easily be taken off or not sewn on at all. As you can see, it's a very clean lined, simple coat. The only thing that's really drawing any attention are the sleeves, which I think is the most fun part. I kind of feel like a pastel mushroom in this coat, which I think is cute for spring. While I do wish that I would have ordered a little bit more fabric so I could have made the longer length, I did have a little bit of fabric left over, so I decided to make myself a matching beret. If you want to learn more, please continue watching. First, start out by cutting out your fabric pieces, including your fashion fabric, lining, sleeve cuffs, and interfacing. This pattern does not include lining for the front or back pieces, so I decided to make my own pattern here so that my coat would be fully lined. If you do not wish to have your coat lined, you can skip this part. I took the jacket front piece and traced that onto paper. Then, I traced the front-facing piece over the top, making sure to match up my pieces and transfer all markings. In order to give enough seam allowance, you will need to add 1 1/4 inch to the pattern only along the side that connects to the front facing. This accounts for the 5/8 inch seam allowance for the lining piece and the 5/8 inch seam allowance for the front facing piece. Cut away the front facing piece from this pattern and you will have a front lining piece that matches up to the front facing piece. This makes one full front bodice pattern. Sew the front facing to the front lining with right sides together. Finish the seam allowance and press the seam allowance to the back. For the back lining, I simply cut the back bodice pieces as is out of my lining fabric. Sew the center back seam together and press the seam flat. Next, sew the front lining pieces and back lining pieces together at the shoulder seam and side seams with right sides together. Finish the raw edges and press. Then, with your upper collar interfaced, attach your upper collar to your lining, making sure to match the markings. Finish the raw edges and press all the seams flat. Now onto the fashion fabric. With right sides together, sew on your pocket bags to the front and back side seams, matching the notches and markings. Sew this at 5/8 of an inch. I like to finish the seam only along the stitching line. Then, I understitch my pocket bag to ensure that it will lay nice and flat. Now you can sew your front and back pieces together along the shoulder and side seams with right sides together. When sewing the side seams, you will have to pivot when you reach the pocket bags and sew along the outside perimeter of the pockets at 5/8 of an inch. Then, continue stitching along the side seam once you reach the other end. Finish all the raw edges and press. Your pocket should look like this. Do this for both sides of the coat. Then, sew both sides together along the center back seam. Finish the raw edges and press. If you haven't already, sew the front darts along the neckline. Now, take your lower collar pieces, and with the interfacing fused to the wrong sides, attach your collar pieces together along the center back like so. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and press, making sure that the seam is not too bulky. You can shave off some of the fabric along the seam allowance if it is. Then, attach your lower collar to the fashion fabric along the neckline, matching notches and markings. Sew, finish, and press the seam allowances. Now onto the sleeve cuffs. This is the sleeve cuff pattern cut out of my fashion fabric. And this is my sleeve cuff pattern cut out of my lining fabric. I needed to add stability and elasticity to my sleeve cuff since a rib knit fabric has a much tighter weave than the fabric that I found. So, I attached the two together using the largest zigzag stitch possible and sewing up and down the pattern piece about 1 inch apart. This is what it looked like. Now, to sew your sleeve cuff, fold the pattern piece in half lengthwise, with right sides together. Sew at 5/8 of an inch along the longest edge, finish the raw edges, and press. Then, flip the cuff right side out and pull one end up through the middle. The result is that your cuff is neatly folded in half and finished on the inside and outside. Now we're going to sew the upper sleeve by folding the sleeve in half with right sides together and sewing at 5/8 of an inch. Finish the raw edges and press. Then, with the longest stitch length possible, sew a line of stitching along the bottom and top of the sleeve so that we can gather it by pulling on the bottom thread like this. Then, we're going to attach the sleeve cuff to the upper sleeve by pinning with right sides together and gathering the upper sleeve to fit the circumference of the cuff. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and finish the raw edges. Your sleeve should look like this. Now we're going to fold the sleeve lining in half lengthwise and sew along the side seam. Finish and press the seam allowance. Then, with right sides together, sew your sleeve lining into your lining armhole or your fashion fabric armhole if you chose not to do lining. Make sure to match your notches. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and finish the seam allowances. Make sure there are no puckers or gathers. Repeat this step for your fashion fabric sleeves. With a longer stitch, you can gather the top of the sleeve to help ease the fabric into the armhole. There should still be no puckers or gathers showing along the seam. Now we're going to attach the lining to the coat. With right sides together, sew the lining and coat together along the outer edges at 5/8 of an inch. You will use this method as well, even if you do not use lining. Do not sew the bottom edges together just yet. Flip the coat right side out and watch how I fully enclose the sleeve and sleeve lining so that no seam allowances are visible. With right sides together, I am pinning the edges together of the sleeve lining and cuff. Sew this seam at 5/8 of an inch and finish the raw edges. The inside of your sleeve will look like this. I found that my sleeve lining was larger than my sleeve cuff, and therefore I had some excess fabric. So I chose to fold in the excess into a makeshift pleat like this. Now, before you fully enclose the lining, be sure to tack or sew together the collars along the seam allowances so that the collar does not pull apart when it is worn or being hung up. Finish enclosing the lining by continuing to pin the lining edges and fashion fabric edges with right sides together. Sew at 5/8 of an inch and finish all the seam allowances. Be sure to leave a few inches along the bottom edge open so that you can pull your coat through. Then, flip your coat right side out through this opening. To finish the lining, you will need to hand sew the opening closed. Last but not least is the belt. With right sides together, sew the belt along all 4 edges, leaving about 2 inches open along one of the longer edges. Trim or finish the seam allowances to reduce bulk. Pull the belt through the opening and press all the corners square. Finish the edges of the belt by hand sewing the opening closed the same as the lining. Finally, you will need to add your buttons. Following the markings, sew a buttonhole at each end of the belt as well as the front of the jacket. Then, sew your buttons as desired. And there you have it, Simplicity S9186 is a super unique and fun coat, perfect for any occasion. Until next time, please like and subscribe.